Today I'm speaking with Dr. Eric Skanson. In addition to being part of the foundation of School Pro K-12, Dr. Eric Skanson has over 17 years of experience in public school administration and 24 years of education at large. He is a seasoned leader, focusing on positive change, outstanding culture, and collaboration. Eric has served on the executive board of MESPA, Minnesota Elementary School Principals Association, since 2014. In 2019, Eric was elected as the Minnesota Elementary Principals Association, MESPA, president, a 900-member professional advocacy group. He represented Minnesota in 2019 as Elementary Principal of the Year. He's an adjunct professor for both Bethel University and St. Cloud State University. He received his doctorate in education from the University of Minnesota in 2016 through the Department of Organizational Leadership and Policy Development. His academic core focus was on the use of collaboration for organizational improvement. Eric has used his developed models to help shape the purpose and outcomes of collaboration in multiple organizations for positive change. Let's get to the episode. I'm educational justice coach Lindsay Lyons, and here on the Time for Teachership podcast, we learn how to inspire educational innovation for racial and gender justice, design curricula grounded in student voice, and build capacity for shared leadership. I'm a former teacher leader turned instructional coach. I'm striving to live a life full of learning, running, baking, traveling, and parenting because we can be rockstar educators and be full human beings. If you're a principal, assistant superintendent, curriculum director, instructional coach, or teacher who enjoys nerding out about co-creating curriculum with students, I made this show for you. Here we go. Dr. Eric Skanson, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing today?
I am great. It is a nice, cool fall day here in Minnesota, and I'm so happy to be on the show with you and excited to talk about how we can do education, do it better. I mean, that's our job, right? Is to do it better every season.
Yes, always striving for growth. Absolutely. So I know a lot of people want to add things to their bio, or they want to go away from either the professional or talk about what's on their mind in the moment, which a static bio doesn't really do. I just want to give you space first off to say anything that you think listeners should keep in mind or know about you as we jump into the conversation today.
Well, outside of bio, I think one thing that people should know is I have a brood of kids at home. So I've got 5 kids at home, ranging from ages 16 down to 5. So everybody's in school this year, which really, I think it's really good for us as educators to remember that our main constituents out here are the students and the parents. And sometimes we forget that, right? We get locked in our own world of education and talking ed talk, and we forget at the end of this logic model, it's about kids and students and families and communities. And it's good. It's good to have that many kids and to think about well, how does that impact my viewpoint on education as a parent? So that's a cool thing to add, I think. And I think a little tidbit, I like to tell people I know how to juggle fire and knives. So that's just a freebie that I'm going to throw in there.
I love the out of left field ideas. Those are the best. That is very impressive, by the way.
Yeah. Only burned a few times.
I was going to ask, how dangerous is this? Okay, well, that's good. And as we think about, I think the grounding that you gave us for thinking about students, families, and communities, I just love that. And I think a lot about when I can center that in conversations with the people I work with, teachers, leaders. Oftentimes we're thinking of freedom dreaming, which Dr. Bettina Love talks about as dreams grounded in the critique of injustice. So how do we do that school better? Like you're talking about every year, how do we get better? And how do we ground all of it in the work of supporting and partnering with students and families and communities? All of those are big considerations. So I'm wondering what's the dream look like for you considering all those things?
Well, one of the things that I try to end my conversations with or my writings with, I always give out 3 letters, which is PKS, which is positive, kind, and supportive. And it's a really simple concept, but it's amazing how much we need to ground back to these ideas that everybody is human and how do we treat people in a human way, which for me, I like to boil it down to those pieces. Can we stay positive? Can we stay kind? Can we stay supportive? And that does not mean that it's free from hard conversations. It does not mean that we don't take context into consideration with that. But I do think that is a reasonable ask, is that when we're working with people, that we stay positive, kind, and supportive. So that's kind of the lens that I always try to deliver on is positive, kind, and supportive. And some days are easier than others, but I would challenge everybody out there to really think about what are your words that you can boil it down to three letters and make that part of your motto, part of your life, part of your work going forward. I stole that honestly from a friend of mine named John. He used it, and I was like, I love that. I said, I'm going to use it. I'm going to run with it, and I have. I talk to students about it. I talk to teachers about it. I talk to administrators about it. Like that is the frame in which I like to try to move that dream forward. Um, like if to make that even bigger, uh, I think education is about opportunity and experiences. And for me, the dream is how do we provide opportunity and experiences that that people would not have an opportunity to do without our help. So whether that's on a small scale, if that is, making sure that we take particular field trips or experiences that give access to our students that they would not previously have had, um, or on a larger scale is how do we provide an education that makes kids and communities believe in what they have as a resource, so that they can be contributing partners in this commonwealth going forward. I really believe that it's one of the larger ideas that we have lost is this idea that we have a commonwealth in our nation. And if it's the nation, or if it's your state, or if it's your school or your community, we all contribute to this community or this commonwealth. And that would be my hope, is that at the end of the day we've contributed to the commonwealth.
I love that so much. That is so good. And I think there's so many things that you just said that I wanted to make sure that listeners heard. And I think that that's a huge one, right? Like contribution to the Commonwealth, giving access and the experiences that students might not otherwise have outside of education. I think about this in the context of like student leadership. A lot of people talk about individual skill building, but it's really, especially with youth, right? It's about the supports we offer to build up the leaders and give the access to the opportunities to be leaders. So
Hmm.
it's kind of this interplay of the individual and the community, which I just love that you anchored this conversation in. And then I also wanted to say you anchored the PKS in, or you caveated the PKS with like, we're still having hard conversations. We're still considering
Hmm.
context. And I just think that is brilliant because a lot of people could take PKS as a concept and be like, oh, it just be nice to everybody, and avoid the hard conversations because that
Oh,
hurts people's feelings, right? And
that
I
is not what
love
it
that
is
you
at
said
all.
it. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it's more of a way of thinking, in that we can have hard conversations. We can have hold people accountable, but it doesn't mean that we can't do it in a positive, kind, supportive way. Because that's modeling, right? And I like that you talked about student leadership. Absolutely, student leadership is about building themselves, but it's also about their impact on their community or their commonwealth. Because that's really what we need is young people to grow up and be leaders who see the world in a place that they can affect, that they can impact and have that impact. But what if they hadn't had that experiences or those opportunities? There's leadership lost. There's an opportunity gap there that I want to make sure that people have that opportunity to lead in their communities.
I love that. And I think it makes me think about too, like beyond the, being leaders as adults too, like even sometimes when students lead projects within their student years, right? It is like transformative sometimes when the students, like it just makes adults listen more when it's
Mm-hmm.
like, oh, students are leading this charge. Like I am going to either adapt my behavior, listen differently, interact differently with this project because it is student led and I
Mm-hmm.
care about students. And so I think there's such potential there too, which is fun.
Oh yeah. I mean, talking with students, with the student change, it's like a wedge in the door, right? Like we wanted to do this as adults. Oh, wait. No, it's actually the kids that are leading this, which opens that door, right? Just enough to open minds and open hearts for these change makers and these deciders in our communities. Uh, let the kids have access to them. 100%. Let the kids have access to them. It is a different approach.
Absolutely. And it makes me think, I know we wanted to talk a little bit about from a leader lens, like how do you kind of create this community? So typically what I think of is I think of things like the mindset of the educators, the adults, right? Which I think is a huge factor in what we're talking about
Mhm.
now. it's also, the pedagogy of how do you build up the skills for all students, not just your typical quote unquote leaders, right? That
Hmm.
are like the people who are like captains of the sports teams or presidents of the classes, right? And also it's like, how do we assess and have those authentic experiences and projects that are beyond just like, the tests and things that school
Hmm.
typically is historically? And how do we make sure the content is, co-created by students? How do we make sure of that? And so I just wonder, like, as a leader who is responsible for creating that culture school wide and hiring folks who are going to contribute positively to that,
Hmm.
what are the things that we have to consider as leaders?
Well, I'm so glad you brought up hiring, because this is one of the things that I'm really passionate about in that, finding the right people, curating the talent for your organization. And we need to remember again that context matters. It's one of my axioms that I have lived my life on, is context always matters. So whatever it can happen in situation A, but that doesn't mean that you can apply that in situation B. Always be aware of the context. And to be honest, Lindsay, this comes back. I was a driver ed teacher at one point in my career. And, one of the things that I would always teach kids is, yes, we need to know where we're going. You need to have the destination. But along the way, we have to make sure that we're making small adjustments based on the context around you. You're always teaching about risk assessment, and I don't like that term in this instance, but we have to know what's happening around us so we can make the best decisions. So coming back to hiring, uh, these opportunities for students, for me, uh, how do I say this? I've evolved in my thinking around um, teacher licensure. For those that don't know, I'm a director of a charter system in Minnesota, and right now we're in a teacher shortage. So we've had to really work to fill our positions, and in Minnesota we call them tier one. So these are people with 4-year degrees that we have a good background in the content that we're bringing them in to teach. And what I have found is that disposition, um, for PKS is really, really important. So they may be the best art teacher. Let me back that up. They may have a really good understanding of art or science or you name it. But if we can't kind of tease out that disposition of how they approach their classroom based on the context of your school, there's no guarantee of success there. So um, I think we really have to find that character piece first. So I'm going to drop another acronym here, CCC, 3 C's of what I look for in hiring. Number one is character. They have to have top character first, because I don't care who you are. If you don't know how to treat people right, positive and supportive, if you don't have a good work ethic, it doesn't matter. Number two is around competency. So this is where we're starting to talk about, do we have a competency in science? Do we have a competency in math? Do we have a competency in art? And then finally, the really fun part I think about teaching is craft. Um, how do you approach it? What's your particular flavor for what you do? And I think those are really 3 things that you have to examine when hiring people to bring in your school. Notice I didn't add a 4th C, which is credentials. That's not in there. I really do believe it's character and competency and craft that determine who is the best fit for your particular school.
Oh, those are good. I love all the acronyms too. This is very fun.
It's easier to remember it, right?
Totally, totally. And so this is really interesting. So I think about the mindset piece that is usually the term that I use, but I love the idea of a disposition, right? So if we're not looking at anything else and we're just looking at the disposition and the mindset and the willingness to engage with students as partners, families as partners, right? I
Hmm.
think that absolutely makes sense as kind of like the first, like if you don't have this, then you don't even almost, I don't know if I'm right. You can correct me. It
Hmm.
almost seems like you don't get to the competencies in the craft, right? Like that's okay.
Doesn't matter. Doesn't
Doesn't
matter.
matter.
It does
Awesome.
not matter.
I
And
like
I
it.
would I would challenge people, when you are interviewing people and talking with people, we have to stop. We have to stop asking theoretical questions, because any can answer those. So, if you're interviewing with me, Lindsay, and I say, what's the best way to, approach classroom management in a high poverty diverse school? Um, Anybody can answer that. Anybody can answer that. But if I change that question just a little bit and I say, Lindsay, tell me a story about a time where your classroom management really impacted the success of the classroom. And I have no problems interrupting you if I'm interviewing. If you're not answering the question, I'll say, no, 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 no. Tell me about your impact. Because sometimes people will kind of wrap it together with, well, we did PBIS at our school, and we had you name it. We had the Spartan way or whatever it could be. No, I want to know your impact, Lindsay. Tell me what you did on the PBIS team to work on standards of character, um and that's where you really get at the disposition of work ethic, of character, of are you positive, kind, supportive? You can tease those things out, and we have to do a better job of asking those questions.
I really like the idea of storytelling as kind of an entry point, and it makes me think too about the opportunities for the existing staff, like the staff that's already on the team, to storytell around some of these too, because sometimes I think, we ask the questions in an interview, we get everybody sorted, and then it's like
Mm-hmm.
the person who hasn't gone through an interview in 10 years, like, do they know what story they would tell in that instance?
Mm-hmm.
And what would be the benefit of having an audience for that story, or the story from last week, or, almost like storytelling as like an ongoing, I don't know if it's check-in, but just like almost honoring of the human teacher experience as
Mm-hmm.
well, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think this is a really cool idea of this offering the opportunity to share the stories almost as a space for reflection as well. I know this is probably not where you were thinking of
No,
going, but
no, I think it's good.
yeah, I wonder what those possibilities are for, like, I think what I'm thinking is you hire people who come in, right? And you have these great hires, and you hire well, and you have a bunch of folks who are already in positions, and what does that look like in the hiring process to kind of bring people together around
Mm-hmm.
PKS, around the dispositions and the classroom style and the craft and like, what does that look like, to merge the new folks
Mm-hmm.
and the folks who have been here?
Well, I think it is your responsibility as an administrator to know your team and know your people well. So it goes beyond just hiring. It goes into a depth of, do I know who you are at your core? Do I know what your values are? Love to do values exercises with people so that we can kind of tease that out. And the reason I tell you that we have to know the whole team is because, if we're hiring a bunch of if the team is already like an A and A and an A, do we really need to hire another A? They may be a great candidate, but I would challenge people to think about diversity on your team. When you go back to Bruce Tuckman's work around group formation, there's some really interesting ideas there about letting people pass through kind of the storming stage, so that they can have this group identity. And in the end, uh, we want to focus on task conflict. Task conflict is good. It means that in the end, we have a better product for our kids, for our teams, for our school, for our community.
Just Lindsay popping in here to tell you about today's freebie for the episode. In relation to Eric and I talking about co creating community values and agreements, I think you'll love my staff meeting agenda series, which starts with a whole staff meeting agenda and the slide deck for co creating community values and agreements. You grab that at lindsaybethlyons.com/blog/148. Back to the episode.
The trap there is that when we have relational conflict that creeps into our team. So the reason I say that is, maybe if you have four people on your team and we're trying to hire a fifth one, do we want to hire another A, or do we want to actually bring somebody in who adds something extra to the team? So if you're forced, if in the end you have choice A and choice B and they're both really good, I would always, always go with choice B. And that's really hard for the interview team sometimes, because they are attracted to like people. Like, oh, they'd fit in so well. Well, then you're all going to be doing the same thing, right? You're all bringing the same strengths to the team. So it's about balance and diversity and making sure that we have a nice balanced team going forward.
Yeah, it makes me think of the middle of these interviews. Usually I'm talking about brave actions, and it makes me think of brave actions on multiple levels, like brave actions as the leader, right? Who
Mm-hmm.
who is coaching almost the hiring committee to make these decisions. brave actions for the parameters or the almost like checklist of like, we are going to focus on character first, then competencies, then craft, right? Like you're kind of putting that out there. And then
Absolutely.
also bravery in like, how do you assess bravery in the candidate to be hired as well, right? In the storytelling and those things. So I don't know which one of those directions you want to take it, but my brain is going all of.
Oh my. Well, bravery. Yes, I love brave people. Um, that sounds like such a like generic statement, but yes, I love brave people. Courageous people, people who are willing to speak up and talk. And again, that doesn't mean we get to be a jerk about it, right? So that comes back to that disposition of PKS. Like, how do you find those people that can do that in a way that is positive, kind, and supportive? Um, yeah, I mean, part of this for me points to the fact too that we don't do a good job of training our interview teams before going into these interviews and setting expectations of what it is exactly that we're looking for. Like all too often, I think we just, hey, do you want to serve on the team? Yep, come on in. We're interviewing Tuesday at 1. Oh, you're not available. Okay. You know, and that's how these interviews are usually set up. And I'm appalled because a lot of it even goes all the way up to our top school leaders, like the haphazardness that happens when we're pulling an interview together. It has to be so much more thoughtful in, what are the outcomes we're looking for? What is the exact skill set that we're looking for? Um, on top of, character, competency, and craft. And I mean, I've seen it so many times. We ended up in interviews and there's these biases that happen. And without the training on the front end and really bringing out a specific talk around, this idea of like confirmation bias or stereotyping bias or halo effect bias. I love that one. That's when we're influenced by one positive aspect of an interview person. Oh, they said they were really great at technology. Really? They said they had a Google Classroom. We attach meaning in interviews, and without the training that happens at the front end, it's really set up for disaster. Similarity bias. That's what I was trying to think of. In that, oh, I really like this person. I feel like I could, be best friends with them. That's not what we're asking for here. That we're not interviewing for your best friend. We're interviewing for a great team member.
Oh, I love that idea. So I'm just kind of like taking notes here. It seems like we have the clear expectations of who we want in the interview committee, set those. We have the training for the interview committee. We have the outcomes beyond the CCCs and also like the skill set that we're looking for in addition to considering the existing team that person is coming into and diversity there. And then all throughout, we're kind of checking against that training for all of these biases. Does that sound like a good summary?
Yeah. And this is why it gets so jacked up about interviewing and like the hiring process is I don't think people do it well, to be honest. I think there's a lot of people that fall trap to the common missteps, and they are not diligent about setting up the interview in a balanced way. I would even challenge, sometimes when we have these interviews for our largest and biggest ed leaders in a district, there is a trap there to be, this sounds weird, but too inclusive, where all of a sudden our interview team is 30 people around the table, and more than likely close to 30 of them have never been part of an interview process before or have taken any work in HR and know the legalities of what you can and can't ask. So then it actually makes, if you're going to do that, you have to spend the time training the interview team on what you can and cannot ask. You have to bring out these ideas around, here's some bias you may experience. So giving them the language to identify the bias when they hear it. It's so important as we're to do this with some fidelity and some intentionality, so that, because again, at the end of this logic model, all these things affect how our schools run, how our schools contribute to our commonwealth and the success of our kids going forward. It is all interlinked, and we have to do a better job of recognizing the links between hiring to our school success to happy, healthy classrooms and communities.
I love this. And it made me actually think about the inclusive piece. I definitely have been in an interview position where there's like 15 people around the table and you're like, who do I look at? And like there's questions
Hmm.
everywhere. I also have thought about, the process that a lot of folks go through demo lessons with students from the school they'll be going into.
Hmm.
I wasn't sure if you have like a recommended kind of series of things. Like, is there the interview, the demo lesson? Are students typically part of the interview committee, or is their feedback when they're part of like a demo lesson? I'm just wondering about the student voice in this as well.
Yeah, I mean that really depends on how much you can allocate for time and effort. And I would argue that you should, like, to whatever nth degree, slow down, make good decisions, include the people that you want to voice from, as long as everybody has kind of been well informed of what we're looking for. And I do love the idea of student voice in there. Again, I think it's really important that if we're bringing students in to share their voice, how do we give them some information of what to look for, some look fors, talking about, what does a good teacher look like? And in the end, we're building student leadership, right, by bringing them in and training them. So, yeah, I think it's really important. When I think about kind of the standard protocol that I would go through, um, I definitely would have an assessment up front for the school body or the organization that allows everybody to kind of have input into the skills that we're looking for, or even more importantly, the skills our school doesn't have. So I don't like the deficit model, but I think it's really important as we're looking for somebody new to bring in that we're not just getting more of the same. So having a systematic look at what our organization or our team currently doesn't have. You administer the assessment, you assemble the team, you train the team, conduct the interview, which again, very deliberate about what questions we're asking. Uh, if we're not looking for a classroom manager, I don't know why we wouldn't. That's a bad example, probably. But take whatever skill it is. If we're not looking for that, then don't ask questions about it, because in essence, our school's got it covered. Like we're good there. Um, and then you have to have a moderated deliberation with somebody who is not invested in the outcome. I really, really believe this, like to have a facilitator or moderator, so that when all the ideas are coming out, somebody can go, that sounds a lot like the halo bias, or we're not going to discuss that. That's actually not a legal question. Somebody who can in it can facilitate that interview. And typically it does fall on a school leader, because we're trying to move so fast in our hiring. And I believe that is because we are in a scarcity mindset, that we're going to move fast and pick somebody, because if we don't, somebody else is going to get them. I challenge the narrative on that. Slow down. You will find the right person.
Yeah, one of the things I was going to ask you about, and I think you've probably covered it, but I wanted to give you space for it, is like the challenges that happen in this work. Is there one challenge that you're thinking maybe a leader who's listening would be facing, either that you've addressed and you're like, this is the one to focus on and this is how you
Mm.
get around it, or something you haven't brought up yet, you're like, you should be aware of this?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's always tension around internal, external candidates. And I think if you do not have a good succession plan in place in your organization, I really challenge leaders to think about that. And that doesn't mean that we can't go externally, but I think every interview, especially for school leadership positions, should have a balance of an internal and an external. However, you have to control the process to make it fair for internals and externals. I would say, especially internals, I've seen over and over where people will bring in extra information about the internal candidates. As an internal candidate, they're going to know a lot more about you. So how do you control for those biases that we talked about? This is where you'll get like I think it's called the horns bias, like bad person horns, um, in that, one person had a bad experience with this person, and they now have moved that bias to a whole new level of they're going to be a horrible principal or a horrible school leader. Well, I don't think that, actually. Let the person talk about their experiences and leave out all the other things. It's almost like in a jury where you have to take into consideration everything that was said. And there's some evidence it's like, nope, that you cannot consider that. it I think it needs to be a lot more like that. But it's very difficult. It's very difficult. I fully acknowledge that in the front end.
Oh, that's such good advice. I had never even thought about that balance and all the considerations that go into that. So thank you. I'm really glad I asked that. Thank you for that answer. And I think as we kind of wrap up our conversation, there's a lot that leaders have to consider. And it seems
Mm-hmm.
like a lot more setup than we typically do out of that scarcity mindset, the rush, all that
Mm-hmm.
stuff. So if there's one thing that a leader listening can kind of come away with and say, like, I'm going to at least start here,
Mm-hmm.
what would that one thing be that you would recommend to start with?
Well, I would say do your pre-work and be intentional about everything leading up to that interview. I know that a lot of districts or a lot of organizations maybe won't have the resources to do it to the nth degree that I'm talking about. But I would also challenge that it's not that expensive to make a right choice. You think about the cost of attrition or turnover that happens in districts, not only the physical dollars of it, but the mental anguish and the starting over and the resets that happen. We don't have we cannot do that anymore. We have to stop treating it like the weekend picnic where we bring the chinette and we throw everything away at the end of the picnic. We have to consider this more like grandma's fine china. Is that when we are having somebody come in, we want to treat them well. We want to take care of them. We want to promote them so that we can build them up and take care of this fine china instead of throwing it in the garbage and then starting over again. So be intentional with how you set up the interview, how you set up the interview team, how you train the interview team, the skills that you're looking for. The whole process should feel very, very intentional and not haphazard.
That is such a beautiful point, and I think it connects to this idea of, like, a lot of times people will say we're hiring for racial diversity or, whatever it is, and these are great goals, but if you don't actually treat the process like the fine china, if you don't build the culture where someone coming in is going to merge well with the team and to feel like they
Mhm.
belong and are valued, then it's going to be a rotating door because you
Mhm.
can't bring someone into a hostile culture and like be like, oh, well, we quickly hired, like, no problem. I think that is something throughout hiring that I constantly see struggles with. And it's like exactly what you're saying is the
Mhm.
antidote, right? Like,
Well, and think about it in four different quadrants, and this is probably leads into like we could have a whole nother show on this, but we're just talking about one aspect of organizational success here is this hiring and search process. Once they're there, we got to build up the whole organization around them, and that means the best speakers, the best the best trainers, and don't be afraid to reach out for resources externally. I see this mistake over and over is that we'll do it. We'll do it ourselves. We'll do it ourselves because in some ways it feels easier, but there are people that spend their life's work in these particular areas. You should lean on them. The third part is personal development. How do we make sure that our school leaders, our teachers, everybody is also in this space of personal development? So outside of pedagogy, outside of these other areas, are they balanced? Are they coming to school healthy? And then finally, a really good strategic planning process that is not just a poster on the wall, that is actually linked to actions, it is linked to outcomes, because all four of those areas actually link together in organizational success. We have to take care of the macros, the micros, and the future and the now.
wow, that could be a whole other episode. That is a great framework. And it actually leads to my next two questions. They're related to those first two I think you shared. So the one about personal development, this is not necessarily academic personal development, but I'm curious to know from each guest. I always ask, what's something you've been learning about lately? And this could be
Hmm,
anything.
what have I been learning about lately? I've been trying to be a better cook and griller. Um, Up until this point in my life, I have not been a great cook, and I feel like I've really increased the pitch of my productivity in the last 3-4 months with my grilling, my smoking. I did some jambalaya last night that I thought was actually really good. So I feel like I'm trying to learn more in that area.
Oh, that's very impressive. Excellent. And then the last thing I wanted to ask is you recommended people reach out, and there are people who do this stuff, right? So, and I know that's very tied to another role that you have in addition,
Yeah.
in addition to the one we've been talking about today. So where can listeners learn about what you do? Do you want to share a little
Hmm.
bit about that?
Yeah.
Recommendations for how to connect with you, that kind of thing?
Sure. So I have a day job. Um, my W-2, as I said earlier, is executive director, but I also have a whole side thing that I'm really passionate about. It's called School Pro, and you can find us on internet, www.schoolprok12.com. And I want you to think about this as an educational concierge company. And we work with people across the nation, the best of the best. We do kind of what I talked about earlier, just like a curating and a screening process to make sure that the right people are matched to the right organizations. So there's no haphazard attachment of you have to have this person, you have to have this person. It is more of tell me about your local context to make sure that the right person can come in. So we provide keynote speakers, professional developers, executive coaches, skill mentorship, all those areas of the four quadrants that I talked about, strategic planning. Um, Again, our job is to make sure that you're successful. So that's what we do. We match the right people to the right schools and the right districts, and it has been an amazing experience, to be honest, to be able to offer these services to schools who come knocking.
Amazing. And we'll link to all of that stuff in the show notes and the blog post for this episode. Dr. Skanson, thank you so much for being on today. It was a pleasure.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you so much for having me, Lindsay, and enjoy and stay PKS, positive, kind, and supportive.
If you like this episode, I bet you'll be just as jazzed as I am about my coaching program for increasing student-led discussions in your school. Shane Safir and Jamila Dugan talk about a pedagogy of student voice in their book, Street Data. They say students should be talking for 75% of class time. Do students in your school talk for 75% of each class period? I would love for you to walk into any classroom in your community and see this in action. If you're smiling to yourself as you listen right now, grab 20 minutes on my calendar to brainstorm how I can help you make this big dream a reality. I'll help you build a comprehensive plan from full-day trainings and discussion protocols like Circle and Socratic Seminar to follow-up classroom visits where I can plan, witness, and debrief discussion-based lessons with your teachers. Sign up for a nerdy, no-strings-attached brainstorm call at lindsaybethlyons.com/contact. Until next time, leaders, think big, act brave, and be your best self.
This podcast is a proud member of the Teach Better Podcast Network. Better today, better tomorrow, and the podcast to get you there. Explore more podcasts at teachbetter.com/podcasts, and we'll see you at the next episode.